Beta2Boss with Chase Harmer. Growth, scale, success.
Welcome to the Beta2Boss podcast, where our motto is you need to hustle harder to accomplish your goals and be a beast about your business. Today, we have Mark Secchia, and I met Mark at a dinner party, and Mark and I hit it off, and I knew he was my people when I learned they based the character Stifler in the movie American Pie off of himself and his personality, since the writer of the movie American Pie was a childhood friend of Mark's. But not only is Mark a fun guy to hang out with, but he also built a multi-million-dollar business in China as a foreigner and sold it for millions of dollars. Truly an amazing story, and I'm super excited to interview Mark today. So thank you, Mark, for being a part of the show.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, before we get started into your amazing business challenges and how you built it, the world wants to know about the Stifler character. Now, this is take two, but there was a split character. I guess there's based upon two people. So tell me a little bit about this whole Stifler character.
What do you mean it's take two? I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, take two. I mean, well, this is the redo of the first one, but we're going to go ahead and act like it's the first one.
Well, first of all, Stifler, a minority of that was based on me. There were two bad guys in the movie, and the execs had to make it into one. The other guy killed the guy. He's in prison.
No kidding. So
yeah.
he stabbed a guy to death? He shot somebody?
If anyone's listening, Google a Brian Krebs, Krebs in Florida. Stabbed a guy in the neck, mugged some other people earlier on in his life. It's kind of a nut job. We were roommates senior year spring break in Cancun, and the guy's just crazy.
Oh my God! So tell me about that Cancun trip with both of you guys together and acting as one.
No one wants to hear those kinds of stories. Well, let's just say I'm glad that past is past.
So one guy comes to murder somebody, and the other guy in death row, and the other guy is actually this millionaire out of China. So that's the Stifler character in a nutshell, huh? So you have one, the yin and the yang. Now, I transitioned to, why entrepreneurs turn to the show. And before getting into your story, I want to start with fear. I had read that in an interview that you had done a while back that, and this is true, that there's a lot of fear in starting something new, starting something different, the fear of failure, and what people will think of you if you do fail, because you're putting yourself out there when you start a business. So you built this multi-million-dollar business in China, and I had read that you ultimately, what prevented you for a long time was the fear of failure. So how did you get past that fear of failure to start this business?
I mean, it's a good question. A lot of people say that entrepreneurs really need to embrace risk and they need to enjoy risk. And I don't really believe in that. If you really want risk, go to a casino.
Right.
That's where all the risk is. Stock market isn't risky, at least not in the long haul.
Sure.
Risk means opportunities to fail are abound everywhere. And for me, I felt like, I had done 6 or 7 businesses in China, and as previous ones had failed here and there, it made me stronger. It gave me calluses, and it taught me what to be afraid of and where to turn when I should turn. Right. And sometimes you need to listen to people around you, and sometimes you need to ignore people around you. And it was the experience of going through all of that really kind of ends up developing, in my case at least, what I should be afraid of and what I shouldn't. I do think I should back up for a quick sec, though, and just kind of say, who am I? Why should people give a shit when they're listening to podcasts
Absolutely.
Like this? In 1987, when I was 14 years old, I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, grew up there, met a girl, she was there. She ended up, after college, going to China. Uh-huh. And we tried to date for a little while back then, but there was no fax machines even, nonetheless, internet in the form that we know it.
Sure.
So we kind of broke up, and it was I can't even remember, around 95 or so, 96, that she moved to a city called Wuhan, central China. Okay. Anybody from the Midwest is familiar with Gary, Indiana. Wuhan's a lot like that, very industrial, very dirty. I flew over, didn't like where she was at all, but I flew back through Shanghai and loved it. You could see the development was going to go off. So I came home, sold my car, quit my job, moved to Shanghai, followed her to China more or less. She moved from Wuhan to Shanghai, and I went straight to Shanghai. Did a couple sales jobs here and there, did my MBA over there, and during the MBA, I didn't like to cook and I didn't like to shop, and my wife was working, so we decided that we wanted to do a lot of delivery. But we got sick of Chinese food and pizza after a while.
Right.
So we started calling all the nice restaurants, and they all said the same thing. They don't do delivery, but man, a lot of people call and ask for
Sure.
it. The demand was there. It was a cheap company to start. I had a little bit of a catering background, so I decided to do this. I didn't have any money at all. In fact, I was a little bit in debt at the time. So I ended up raising $50,000 of just debt in the company. I was trying to get equity but nobody really believed in it. Almost ran out of money in the first year or two and really scraped by. I had to raise another $10,000 or so. Ended up turning it around, and I think by the time I sold the business, we were somewhere in the range of, in U.S. dollars, about $30 million to $40 million U.S. dollars a month. A year, in revenue.
When you stopped?
Okay.
Yeah,
when I sold it.
When you sold it.
Yeah.
Okay, now, this started off as an actual project for college, right?
Yep.
So you went to an MBA program in China, the first foreigner to graduate there. I think it's the China European International Business School.
Yep.
And this started off as a project. So tell me about how this kind of...
Well, most MBA programs have an internship. At least they do in Asia.
Sure.
They give you a 3-month break where you're supposed to go get some experience at a company. And it's relevant for the Chinese students because most of them had come from state-owned enterprises, companies that don't value profit. It's called the Iron Rice Bowl. You have a job forever. You have benefits forever. You don't really have to perform that much. So for them to go into a private entity and work for 3 months is very valuable. But I had been working for a long time, and I didn't really value the idea of being the only white guy at a company where they just parade me around at press conferences and whatnot.
You don't like being paraded.
No. And so I wanted to start this business pretty bad, and they fought me on it. They didn't want me to do it. They'd already promised me to, I think it was a Shanghai petrochemical company.
So is that what they do? They kind of do almost like arranged marriages, but they arrange business
Well, they did with
relationships?
me because I was kind of a valuable commodity, being the only pale face in the institution.
Pale face, a.k.a. Mark Secchia. Okay, so you convinced them to do this project, and you started by yourself? You started with some colleagues?
I grabbed 2 friends of mine who were also in the program. In China, you can either open up a company owned by yourself or owned by a Chinese person. Own it yourself, you have a lot of disadvantages. As a foreigner.
Gotcha.
You're in a court of law, you're guilty until proven innocent. Whereas if you're Chinese, it's the other way around. The financial controls are much looser if you're Chinese. So I kind of did it in that underhanded way of hiding it in the Chinese guy's name.
So were you guys 50-50 partners? Or?
Well, I was always the 100% owner, but I was also always the 0% owner.
So how do you do that? Did you actually give him some sort of back-end equity?
Kind of. We did a napkin deal where we negotiated a little bit, and we said if I ever sell the company, I can't remember the percent, it was 28%, I think it was, if I ever sold the business. I also offered to hire his mother basically for life, and his mother was a retired woman who ended up being great. Oh, she ended up being a fantastic employee of the company. And, it's kind of a long, complicated process, but the general idea was that I buried the entity in debt, and I put all the assets and revenue into my name.
Gotcha.
And what that meant was, if he ever wanted to steal the company from me, he would owe, $1 or $2 million to the staff and to our suppliers and to the rent. I wouldn't buy computers, I'd lease them. I did anything I could to build the debt in the company, and then I put all the cash in my name.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's very smart. Now, you guys started Sherpas in 1999, and then you ultimately had it with this business partner. Your first food app was called WTF, which we obviously recognize here for a certain slang term. But in your world, tell me about that and the correlation to what it was.
Well, the name of the app, our website, if anyone wants to visit, is just sherpa.com.cn. It's a food delivery company where we're in a couple cities in China. We work with a couple hundred restaurants, and people use our app. It's like DoorDash, but on a much bigger scale because Shanghai and Beijing are very vertical cities. So we're talking guys on mopeds zooming around doing 15 orders between lunch and dinner. Whereas here in the States, it's more cars, and maybe you'll do 4 or 5 orders at a lunchtime or a dinner time.
Gotcha.
It was the back end of our app that was called WTF. So once you've ordered, you want to see where your food is. Where's the food? But we call it WTF because people generally, they get hungry, they get angry.
It's the same correlation, right?
Yeah.
So, growing this business, you guys obviously started with one concept in mind. The concept was that you are a foreigner. Foreigners want to eat out. They don't necessarily want to go out to these dinner places all the time. So your main target audience was the foreigners. However, over time, you were able to cultivate a lot of the mainstream people as well, and that ended up being about 50% of your business. So tell me about that. I mean, did you partner with companies? Did you partner with restaurants? Did you just go out there and grassroots market? How did you do that?
Well, the beginning of it was targeting who we were actually going to serve. And of course, the Chinese market's what you want, but the real low-hanging fruit is foreigners. To market to them is much cheaper. Plus, I'm a foreigner when I'm in China, and I know what I want. So I just kind of based it around myself. I was in my early 20s, and that's where our target clientele was. So it's very easy for me to build a business around what I myself would want. But we were very careful to always do all of our material in both Chinese and English, both under the hope that we'd eventually get Chinese customers, but also knowing that a lot of foreigners wouldn't order from a service that only offered English language because they would think they're getting ripped off and paying a higher price. So when they saw the bilingual nature of our business, they didn't feel like they were getting screwed.
So exactly how old were you when you started Chirpus?
26.
That's incredible because, starting a business out here, is difficult, but ultimately you were young, 26-year-old, and at 26, I know what I know now, and I definitely don't know what I knew at 26 years old. So you were in a foreign country starting all this stuff, so that's actually remarkable.
Well, it's hilarious to go back and read the original business plan. How off we were.
What was the original, just tidbits of like some of the things that were so off that you didn't realize?
Well, the reason our name is Sherpas is because I had been watching an interview with this guy in the States, a short little bald dude who had wanted to open some kind of online book company. And everyone asked him, like, why isn't it called Books? He named it after some river somewhere. And they were like, why isn't it Books.com? And he's like, well, we may not always want to be books. So that's why Sherpas is not just food delivery or, something like that, because we thought we want to expand out. And the irony here is that we are 99.9% food.
Right.
In 18 years, we never branched away from food.
But you did try.
Well, you know who the other guy was?
Who?
Amazon.
Yeah, they're not successful at all. But but you did try to actually do other things besides food delivery.
Oh yeah, and we failed. This is going to date us. We went into film developing, dry cleaning, flower delivery, magazines, cigars, and we tried to go into anything that could be delivered to a retail customer. But it really ended up hurting our core business because to do the customer service, our call center had to, English was their third language. And a lot of our customers, English was their second or third language, if they're French or German or whatever.
Right.
So you have this third language, speaking to a third language, and the customer service was just diving. When someone would call up and say, why isn't there more starch in their shirt? Well, that's starch, and they got the starch that's in potatoes. It was getting really confusing. So our call center and customer service managers both came to me and said, can we go back to just doing food? And food's a much more profitable area to be in anyway because you can sell to, I think we make about 80% off our money off of customers who order us sometime between 3 and 5 times a week.
Sure. And that kind of gets me into my next question, and skipping around here, we ultimately talk about training employees, right? The difficulty of even getting an employee in, setting them through, whatever process it is that they're specifically going to be doing, and they're used to doing this particular process, and then you have them start to do other things. What did you find most difficult about retraining employees, I guess, which could be relative to here in the United States and China?
Well, when we first started training our staff, training the couriers, a little bit easier. The concept of it's not that hard. Pick this up, don't turn it upside down, deliver it while it's still hot.
Sure.
They're smart people. They could figure it out. The call center was a little more difficult. Customer service was in its infancy in China in 1999 when we launched. And it was very, very difficult. I have a great story about a girl that we hired, and one of my questions is, what's an example of good customer service that you've gone through? And she talked about how one day she bought some pants and she spilled on them, and she brought them back and said that the stain was already there when she bought the pants. And her example of good customer service was the store not taking the pants back. So, of course, I asked her what an example of bad customer service was, and she said she and her friends used to go to McDonald's. They'd share one cheeseburger. They'd eat almost the whole thing. They'd pull a hair off, put it in the burger, and bring it back, and they would give them a new burger. So their concept of customer service was protecting a company from unruly customers.
Completely opposite of
And I love the fact that she was admitting that she's like a thief and a liar right in our interview.
So you didn't hire her, I guess.
Oh, we totally hired her. She did Judy Lawrence. She even took an English last name for some crazy reason.
All right. Okay. So let's transition over here. I mean, obviously, doing all that is extremely difficult. But you guys grew a business, which you started in Shanghai, which is a very vertical city, as you mentioned. But you also went into a couple other cities. So what was the process like actually expanding into those different areas? And what was the most difficult part about expanding into those areas? Because that means more employees, more management, more people in place to watch those guys on scooters and deliver those orders. So how did you do all that? And what was that transition like?
Well, there's when I think about growing the business, I mean, obviously, whether you're starting a bar or an auto shop, to me, as an entrepreneur, it's about how can I scale it up? How can I grow it? So we were always focusing on where can we go next? What can we do next? And that came down to offering the same product to new customers or new products to the same customers. and we had kind of failed at delivering new products to the same customers. We hadn't done very well in like the things that I mentioned before, like magazines and the dry cleaning and some of that. So we really knew we needed to go somewhere else. And that became a cultural change, because churning your business from a small family-owned business in one city to kind of going to a headquarters with branches, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made there. How are you going to manage it? Or how is your management team going to be structured? You know, every single staff, not every single staff, but the majority, they want to move up. They want a bigger salary. Sure. They want more respect. And how are you going to structure that? Because if you, like our call center, the way we structured that, our manager could never go above call center manager because we had one call center. It served all of our cities. So she was kind of spinning her wheels, and that was real difficult to figure out how to promote her. I can't just give a manager more and more money without any extra responsibility. Whereas some of the other managers, marketing and business development, they were able to grow into the new cities. So I was really learning a lot about that. And then the other side of it that was difficult was how to grow. Were we going to acquire somebody, or were we going to do it organically? So what we decided to do is we took two cities that were relatively close to Shanghai, Hangzhou and Suzhou, each about an hour away. And I bought a company in Suzhou, and we grew organically in Hangzhou. And we learned throughout that process.
What was the difference about growing organically? What was the difference, like the biggest difference between those two?
The fact that staff that we inherited from the company I acquired, changing their culture was almost impossible. I would say about a year after the acquisition, I don't think we had more than one employee remaining in the office from the old business. They were still answering the phones in the old company's name. They were still following the old company's rules. You know, one of our things was don't be a detective. Someone calls in with a problem, just take responsibility for it. Sure. It's our fault. Doesn't matter if it's the restaurant's fault or not. We are representing the restaurant. And just offer a solution. Let someone else figure out what happened. But they weren't used to that. They were used to calling the courier, find out what happened, calling the restaurant, they were wasting all this precious time right at our peak hour trying to be detectives.
Sure.
And a lot of problems like that. And the whole reason for this was Beijing is really the only other major city where we knew we'd be profitable. And so we wanted to test Hangzhou and Suzhou for that model. And we decided that we were definitely going to grow organically when we went to Beijing.
So what was the key, really, to being synonymous with the food delivery service in those particular verticals? I mean, because at this time, there's other competitors in the market now, right? Or there were at the time when you were doing it now, too. So what was the key to being like the leader in those particular markets?
I mean, we crushed our competition with customer service. We absolutely crushed them. That led to some problems.
Did you have people that were competing against you in those cities?
Oh yeah, definitely. Not anybody who was worthy of fear at the time. You know, the major ones were people like, we had a guy who was a manager in one of the restaurants we worked with, and he saw our couriers coming and going all the time. So he thought, that's got to be much easier business than actually opening a restaurant. You know, so he quit. So one of the reasons that we were successful is we were able to kind of crush our competition with customer service. Because kind of like the example I just mentioned, good service back then was very hard to find. And that led to problems for us because we had cases where customers were ripping us off. I've even met some customers who said every single time they ordered, they would complain falsely. And they were ordering from different phone numbers and to different addresses, so we could never peg them down as problem customers. But on the other hand, the competition that we had, it wasn't very fierce. The ones that we did have, particularly I'm thinking of an Italian restaurant, where one of their managers kept seeing our couriers come and pick up food and go. And he thought, man, that's got to be way easier than having a restaurant with an oven and inventory and chefs. So he quit his job to do food delivery.
And became your biggest competitor?
Well, at that point in time, not anymore. You know,
sure.
He's still around, but he's still pretty small. But that was one of the first people that was actually competing up against us. Whereas in my case, you know, it was all the stars had come together, and I really wanted to do it. As an entrepreneur, you know you're really passionate about something when you just can't stop thinking about it.
Sure.
Pad of paper by my bed. I was constantly writing down ideas. At night, you know, all the time I was dreaming about the business.
Yeah.
You know, so it just kind of consumed me. And it wasn't just like I kind of saw this little opportunity, I'd go for it.
I think that's kind of what you almost need to be successful, right? Because it's not just the fear of failure, but it just really has to consume you.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that's the really only way you can actually break it through that brick wall.
And experience helps.
For sure. That's for sure. I mean, you're 26, so you probably learned a lot by the school of like Hard Knocks, right? Did you really have like mentors that were just like coaching you through this whole thing?
No.
You were the first person in these cities to actually do something like this. So
even when we went to go do it, there weren't even licenses available. You know, our first license was for whale oil product delivery because no one understood food delivery. They're like, why wouldn't you want it fresh? Why don't you just go to the restaurant?
Sure.
It's like, well, some people are too busy to leave their desk. Well, no, they're not. So we really had to kind of go around the licensing program to even start the business.
And I think that stops a lot of people too, because everyone thinks it has to be perfect before you release it, right? But there is no license, so there's no way to be perfect. There's no perfect way to do what you did, because at the time you started something that had never been done before. So I think people, when they're designing things or they're building a company, a lot of times they'll be nitpicking themselves trying to be perfect before they release it. The problem is if you wait long, then your competitors step right in front of you.
If I had $10 million invested in this business, I'd wait till it was perfect.
Right.
But at the level that we were, it really, you kind of just go out and do it.
You have to.
A lot of people say that forgiveness is easier to get than permission.
For sure.
For those of you listening that maybe would want to open a business in a foreign country, one of the problems can be finding out who is responsible for your industry and finding out who can allow you to do this or who can permit you. So sometimes we would just go and start doing stuff because we couldn't find out who was responsible for it. And once we got in trouble, we were like, yes, we met the guy who gives a crap about this area, and through him we would then find out who we need to talk to.
And sometimes that's what you got to do. Now, do you attribute the majority of your growth, or how you guys catapulted your growth, really to being first to market? Or was it a variety of other factors?
Yeah, definitely. It was early enough and late enough. Had we launched any earlier, I don't think our runway would have been long enough to reach profitability. For us, when SARS came about, I can't remember if that was like 01 or 02, but when SARS happened, that's when our business took off. That's when people really got afraid to leave their homes. They didn't want to catch this unknown disease. Many people were equating it with AIDS at the time when it first came out.
Okay.
So they were just shuttering themselves in. Had we started a year or two earlier, I wouldn't have had the money to make it until that time. Had we started a little bit later, I actually met two people who were probably more ambitious and more intelligent than I am that would have started this kind of business. They even already registered their name, one of these guys did. So the timing was essential.
Which is perfect. You just needed people to be scared and stay in their house, so they have to order food from you.
Exactly. That's why I created
All you needed was
the catalyst.
I created the catalyst, the scars. So you were able to scale this company to over 400 employees, and obviously you started relatively modest with under $50,000 in capital, and revenue up towards $40 million per year when you finished. And I think a lot of that you attribute to the culture that you guys developed there. And I know that you're a big culture guy, and I've read many places that you built this amazing culture at your company. So talk to me a little bit about that and how important you think building this culture in a company is to the success of the company and growth of the company.
Oh, extremely important. One of the things I have to attribute it to is my wife, who was a cultural anthropologist, a Chinese cultural anthropologist, and she had done her master's and she almost made it through her PhD. And she's able to really talk a lot about the culture. And it's not something I ever really thought about. For me, customer comes first. But I learned through her that culture is important. And also, I had done 5 or 6 businesses before this that I realized at the beginning when I built those businesses, it was so much fun. It was so easy to make a change. It was so good to make an impact on the company early on. Because once the company gets bigger and it has its own momentum, and momentum is a variety of things, and culture is one of them, it's so hard to change that. Like, our culture is ignore the competition. And it's almost a running joke in the office. Your browser history is not allowed to have a competitor's site in it. You're not allowed to have any competitor's
Is this
marketing
China rules
material.
or US
China
rules? Okay.
Well, we never had a business in the USA, but it was my rule for the China company.
Sure.
You can't have our competitors' literature on your desk. We want to be the leader. We want to sit around and think about what can we do next. We don't want to, while our competitors are doing a buy one, get one free, boring, we want to get out there and lead. And we were able to do some really funky things.
Give me a good example of that.
When we first did coupons, gift certificates and that kind of stuff, we thought, let's not just do a normal coupon. So we did money. And we put our logo right in the middle. It was U.S. dollars because it's China, so they don't care that your coupons look kind of like dollar bills.
Did they have Mark Secchia?
No,
George
they
Washington?
did. But they had our logo guy in the middle of it and everything.
Yeah.
And then our next ones, we did poker chips.
So did those work? How successful were those?
And they were great, but it was just kind of like people, there's this whole theory about if the tray on the airplane doesn't work, then the company's probably not maintaining the engines.
Right.
So it's kind of like that. If they see that you're having a lot of effort going to a particular area, they just kind of assume you're doing that much effort across all areas.
Right.
So it's those little things that are kind of quirky and interesting, and the poker chips were great. People loved them. I'd go to poker games and I'd see people have their lucky chip and it'd be one of our Sherpa coupon chips.
That's
but
awesome.
Also, one of the other things that was fun for me is we were on the 3rd floor of a building and our building management wanted to charge us more money because we're using the elevator a lot. So I made a fruit elevator rule. No staff could take an elevator. and with a few exceptions like age and whatnot. And in exchange for that, I will buy fruit for every employee every day. And that's great. But on the other hand, if I catch you taking the elevator, your whole department the next day doesn't get any fruit, and your name and picture go on the wall is the reason why.
Oh,
because a lot of staff get lazy. You know, it's 47 steps up.
Yeah.
You know, you got to run to your car real quick. It's real tempting to go take the elevator.
Yeah.
And then the next day, you're going to get a lot of crap from your colleagues because you didn't get your bananas.
How often
or
did
whatever.
that happen?
A lot. I'd say, a dozen times a year or so.
Okay.
I lived in the building too, so it was easy
did
for me
you?
to catch them. Yeah.
So tell me about that. So this was it was an office / retail or like commercial.
First 4 stories of the
Were
office were
commercial.
offices, and then the 5th to 15th were residential.
That make it convenient for you, huh?
Yeah.
Well, evolution is the key to survival, I think, in any business. Obviously, having a company that has 400 employees and you have this culture going on, and you have competition coming and trying to take your business. How do you evolve? And you said you like to stay ahead. You don't really want to know what they're doing. So how do you stay ahead of that if you don't really know what they're doing necessarily?
Good question. The China case, particularly in the late 90s, early 2000s, is a little bit different from America because it's not all about evolving. For us, it's kind of just about staying alive in a lot of senses. We would have a lot of government officials come to shut us down. We'd have a lot of instances where the next day it'd be like, wow, I can't believe the company's still running. So in some cases it was like, they'd come and say, why do you have a whale oil products delivery license? Why don't you have food delivery?
Oh.
And we'd say, we don't have, the food delivery doesn't exist. And they'd say, well, then you're illegal. You're going to jail. Pay $1 million, and it's
really?
like, oh yeah. I mean, dude, I had a case where a guy came to us and said, the China Telecom came to us and said they're the main phone operator, that we have to shut down for an undetermined amount of time as they upgrade the phone lines. We said, no, we can't shut down our phone lines. We didn't have a website then. This was like 2002. And they said, well, you're just going to shut down. I said, how long? I said, I don't know. At least 2 weeks.
Ooh.
And he wouldn't tell us, the maximum. And so I said, okay, can I leave a message routing people to a new number? No. Can I forward the call? No. We couldn't do anything. We had to just completely shut down.
For 2 weeks, did you?
Well, here's how it ended, though. When he left, he gave me a personal business card and said, all right, well, I have a private company that can fix this for you in one night for 20,000 RMB, for $3,000, which to me was a ton of money, but I couldn't really figure out another way around this. And he'd give me a tax receipt and everything, so it wasn't really a bribe. And his guys did an amazing job. They spent one night there, about 13 hours. They did everything. They had to hand pull like 400 phone lines up through the well of the office. There wasn't like a PBX phone exchange.
Right.
And they did a great job. The next morning it was all set. We operated perfectly. That afternoon he comes back in with his China Telecom gang and tried to fine me 200,000 RMB, so $30,000 US, for illegally using a private company to do a job that only the
same guy.
The same guy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Oh my God.
So when you're dealing with a lot of that, sometimes the business customer service
curious.
Stuff has to take a second seat.
Wait. So you pay this guy $3,000. He fixes the problem. Then he comes back in the next day with his buddies that want to fine you even more money because now this problem's fixed and you're operating, but you're not operating. You operated through a private company that wasn't subsidized to do the work.
Yeah.
So how did you
it wasn't authorized to do the work.
So
yeah.
how did that end? Like, did you guys negotiate down a deal or?
No, didn't pay a thing. I got plenty of time. My big thing at the company is I don't do anything. A lot of CEOs or GMs, when the government comes, the government will wear them down because they have to attend meetings, they have to talk to customers and clients. Whereas me, I don't really have a specific function. So other CEOs would be like, well, I'm spending 3 days talking to this asshole from the government. My time is worth $500 an hour. I'm better off paying this guy $6,000 so I can gain 3 days of my life.
Sure.
As soon as you pay that $6,000, someone else comes and asks for
Yeah.
20. Someone asks for 50.
Right.
Someone else's cousin comes through for 100, and it's a never-ending thing. So they would call me Tia Gongji, which is iron rooster, which means my feathers can't be plucked. So I wouldn't pay a single bribe. But there's little tricks that you would learn. I would generally schedule my government meetings at 10 a.m. and then I would eat a huge breakfast at 9:30. As they get hungry at noon, they want to break for lunch, and I'd say I can't, but let's stay and talk about this issue. And they'd say, well, we're hungry. Well, if we leave, then I have to go do something else. But if you guys want to stay, we can stay all day. And little tricks like that. I'd also learn to not really talk to someone who was younger. If they'd send a guy in his late 20s, early 30s to talk to me about something, he waits for me. They send someone over in their 50s, that's serious.
Yeah.
Someone in their 60s, I'm fucked. So you kind of learn the rules.
Right.
I had a great one where a government bureau came into us, and they're the guys that control the parking on the streets.
Yeah.
Very important to us, because at that time we had about 100 guys parking on our sidewalk in front of our building. That's a no-no. And when they came to talk to us, they were telling us that there's going to be a new awning tax because there were some faulty awnings around the city and some air conditioners had fallen and hurt people. The government didn't have a budget for it. So they were going out and assessing how many awnings you had in your building and charging you a tax thusly. And again, we got a tax invoice from the government. It was all like legit. And we ended up paying about $1,000 or so. And we had about a 2-hour meeting with them, diagramming how many awnings we had and what percent of the tax we need to pay. And they left, and my accountant and I just started laughing because we don't have a single awning on our whole building. But you can't say that.
Right. Well, let's talk about, I think we're nearing the end here, but there's a lot of hurdles that every entrepreneur goes through. Obviously, you've talked about quite a few of them and tough things that you have to do as a boss. Can you talk to me about, there's a story about you having to fire a general manager that was diagnosed with cancer, and I know I put myself in that situation, and I'm like, man, that would be hard for me to do, but sometimes you just have to make decisions that are tough when you're a boss. So talk to me about that particular decision and how that worked out.
Well, that was my first general manager. Her name is Mai. She's an American Vietnamese lady, and I had worked with her at a previous job. And she spoke 6 languages. She was a huge foodie. She was kind of like the mother to the business. And so when I needed a general manager at Sherpa's, I sought her out and hired her. And about a year and a half into it, she was not doing a very good job. And I was young. She was old. I was inexperienced and she was experienced. And I was nervous to fire her. And I kept thinking the glass is half full, that this will get better. She'll learn. And in the end, she just wasn't learning. She was making so many mistakes and really being lazy and ignoring problems and not really being aggressive in growing the business. And I finally came to terms when I ran out of money around 2001, and this is pre-SARS, so I didn't get my sales boost yet.
No sales boost.
And she was on a trip to America, and she thought she was going to had breast cancer. When it turned out that she didn't, but at the time we didn't know that she didn't. And I had to actually call her while she was staying in a hospital in America and fire her.
Wow.
For someone I had known at that point for 5 or 6 years, which in China foreigner relationships, that's quite a long time. And to go through that, but it really made me, I want to say, more of a man to kind of go through that, to realize I was never thought I was a person that valued money over well-being, but at a certain point, I can't, if my business goes under, I'm going to owe my employees money, and I'm not going to be able to pay them.
Right.
So am I going to give her preferential treatment and forget about all the other 50 employees, all the other 200 suppliers? So it really kind of turned me around as a person, and also turned the business around. And it made me realize that I have to make tough decisions.
That makes sense. So in an article for Disruptor DNA that I had read, it was talking about what you do when your startup matures. You talked about how you like to relinquish control to your employees, and you relished in the opportunities to have them make strategic decisions. And ultimately, you just clarified in there that ultimately you like to be the guy behind the scenes, not necessarily in the front. So how do you, I know most business owners in general don't really like to relinquish control, but what was so gratifying about that process, and how do you think that helped your business?
Well, for me, it all started with the process of interviewing people. We interview people, we train them, and then eventually they'd quit. And that always kind of got to me. But I realized that there was a group of employees that I had found through non-traditional processes. I'd be at a restaurant and I'd have a waitress with great service. I was in a meeting with a company and their translator was amazing. And after those times, I approached those people and I hired them. And I hired them because of who they were and what I'd experienced in their real world. And they really felt more valuable because they saw that I saw something in them. It wasn't just they had the best resume and they interviewed the best and they had the best education and then the lowest salary requirement and that kind of stuff. And so once I'm particularly thinking of 3 people that I hired that way. And once I had realized that all of them had been around for 5 years and the average time was 2 years that other employees were staying, I thought, okay, this is interesting because I got this group of people that doesn't want to leave. And I really thought, why don't I just give them more and more responsibility? And as I gave them more and more, the company was doing better and better. And I realized it's less about what I do, and it's more about, I think at that time I had 11 people reporting to me. It's more about what they do. And for me, life became about motivating them and less about getting involved with anything. I mean, yeah, I got the financials and I'd go through that, but I would just give them, I remember seeing that license plate WWJD in America.
Yeah.
And I kind of started a process of what would Mark want. And it started with me paring down my philosophy into a more understandable snippets. So like I had to be willing to take bad decisions lightly because I had to kind of focus them all. Like, for example, maybe when frontline customer service, we had to talk about pizzas and when customers were returning pizzas. And I came up with a blanket rule. If someone got something on their pizza that they don't want, the pizza's free. But if somebody got a pizza and it was just missing something they wanted, they got a 30% discount.
Gotcha.
And that's going to lead to problems. But in general, that's a way that they can just say, what would Mark do?
Right.
That's what he would want, and I'm not going to get in trouble for that. No matter how irate, how angry the customer is, and even if essentially it's wrong, I want to give them that authority to go ahead and do that. And so it would permeate all the way down to couriers and all the way up to the managers.
Sure.
And I love that because then as I stepped away and the business blossomed,
people feel more ownership.
Tons of ownership, and it's awesome.
And that's the key, I think, is that once they start feeling that ownership, that's when they start taking pride in the work and doing more than what you expect them to do.
Certainly. It's game over for the competitors at that point. It really is.
So when did you actually completely be an overseer of the company, essentially living in the States? You were going back and forth, I think, for a while. So when did you actually completely transition?
Well, it started in 2009 when my daughter was born. Mm-hmm. I decided to take Wednesdays off and just stay home and be with her.
Gotcha.
And I realized the company kind of did better when I was gone. On Thursday mornings.
Because you trained them so well.
Well, there's nothing on my desk on Thursday mornings.
Awesome.
Things went fine, and they had their internal squabbles, but that's kind of good. The heat amongst the employees and the managers is always good to have that kind of spice in there. Mm. But other than that, man, I tell you, they just took off with it. It was kind of like now that Mark's quote unquote out of the way, we can really go forward.
Right. Well, anytime that you're out of the way, I think it's probably best for everyone, right?
That's true.
Mark, your amazing story, man, and you live close by, so I can always knock on your door and get a beer with you down the street. My office is obviously just less than a mile away, so I sincerely appreciate you taking the time for me today and all the people that are listening to the podcast. Is there anything left that you'd like to say?
Well, my biggest words of wisdom are, you can't do a good deal with a bad guy.
That's correct. I think that's pretty much true along all business lines, so take that to heart. And Mark, again, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you, boss.
You got it.
Hustle.
Thank you for listening to the Beta2Boss podcast. For resources or to leave feedback, visit www.beta2boss.com or www.paycertified.com. If you haven't yet, you can subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss any future episodes. Remember to dream big and act on your dreams.